Most advice about getting rich quietly assumes you already have money to work with, extra income to invest, room in the budget to cut, a salary high enough that the math eventually works out on its own. If you're on a low salary, that advice isn't wrong exactly. It's just written for someone else's situation, and applying it to yours usually just makes you feel like you're failing at math that was never built for your numbers in the first place. So this isn't going to be a list of things that work better with more money. Every single one of these 6 is built specifically around the actual constraint of a small paycheck, because pretending that constraint doesn't exist has never once made it go away. I want to say something else plainly before I start. A low salary is not a personal failing, and nothing in this video is meant to suggest it is. Wages are shaped by industries, locations, timing, and 100 things outside any one person's control. What's actually in your control is narrower than the whole picture, but it's real, and it's worth using properly instead of ignoring because the bigger picture feels unfair. Here's the part that actually matters, though. Income is only one half of the equation, and it's the half you have the least control over in the short term. The other half, what you do with the income you've already got, is where almost all of the actual movement happens for people starting from a low number. That's not a consolation prize. That's genuinely where the leverage is. A lot of people spend years waiting for the income half to change before they touch the second half at all and lose years they didn't need to lose. The two don't have to happen in order. In most of the stories I've actually seen work, they didn't. There's a specific kind of relief in realizing this honestly. Waiting for a raise or a new job before you're allowed to start building anything puts your entire financial life in someone else's hands. An employer's budget, a market's timing, factors you can influence a little but not control. The second half of the equation is fully yours, starting today, regardless of what anyone else decides about your paycheck this year. 6 things. None of them require you to already have savings, a degree, or a higher salary than the one you're currently working with. Some of them will feel almost insultingly small when I explain them. Stick with me on those specifically. The small ones tend to be the ones that actually get skipped, and skipping them is usually the real reason nothing changes for years at a time. Strategy 1. Save the percentage, not the amount. On a low salary, 1% of your paycheck can look almost embarrassingly small written down, sometimes less than the cost of a single meal out. That's exactly why most people on a tight income skip saving entirely, reasoning that an amount that small couldn't possibly matter. That reasoning is backwards, and it's costing people years. The number was never really about the number. It's about whether saving is a habit that exists in your life at all, at any size, before you have room to make it bigger. A 1% habit is trivially easy to grow to 3% later. A habit that doesn't exist yet has to be built completely from nothing, usually at the exact moment life gets busier and harder to build new habits in. I've watched people wait for a real amount to start with for years. $500 a month, $1,000, some number that finally feels serious enough to bother with. That number rarely arrives on its own. What tends to happen instead is a modest raise gets fully absorbed by a slightly nicer life before the saving habit ever gets attached to it, and the waiting just quietly continues under a new paycheck. 1% of a genuinely modest paycheck might be $18 or $20 a month. It won't feel like progress for a long time because it isn't, yet that's not the part doing the work early on. The part doing the work is that the transfer happens automatically, without a decision required, every single time you get paid, whether you remember it exists or not. By the time your income actually does move, a raise, a better job, a certification that pays off, the habit is already fully built and waiting for the bigger number to flow through it. You're not starting the hard part late. You already did the hard part, back when the amount was too small for anyone to notice or care about. Think of it less as saving money in the early months and more as saving the muscle itself. The $18 is almost beside the point. What you're actually banking is proof, month after month, that a piece of every paycheck moves somewhere else before you ever get the chance to spend it, and that proof is worth far more later than the early dollars ever were on their own. If your honest reaction to save 1% is that it's too small to bother with, I'd gently push back on that. The habit is the actual asset here, not the $18. Almost everyone I've seen build real savings on a low income started with an amount that looked exactly this small, and almost nobody who waited for a real amount to start with ever actually started at all. Set it up today if you haven't already, even before finishing this video. Open the app, set the transfer, pick a number that feels almost too small to matter. That feeling of smallness is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's just what the beginning of this particular habit is supposed to feel like. Strategy 2. Invest in the one skill that actually moves your own number, not a general self-improvement idea, a specific skill tied to a specific outcome you can name. On a low salary, your own earning capacity is usually a bigger lever than anything you could realistically save or invest in the short term. The problem is most people either don't believe that or don't know which specific skill would actually move it. This isn't about going back to school for 4 years either. It's usually something much narrower. A certification your current employer already values, a specific technical skill your industry is short on, a credential that unlocks a defined next role you can already see from where you're standing right now. The distinction between vague and specific matters more than it sounds like it should. Get better at my job is a feeling, not a plan, and feelings are easy to abandon on a tired Tuesday. Pass the certification listed on the internal posting for the role one level above mine is a target you can actually measure progress against week by week, whether you feel motivated that particular day or not. The reason a defined target matters so much is that vague self-improvement is easy to abandon, because there's no specific finish line to measure against. Learning a new skill is easy to quit in week 3. Passing the certification that qualifies me for the role posted on our break room board is a lot harder to quietly let slide, because there's an actual door on the other side of it with your name potentially on it. 20 minutes a day, most days, aimed at one specific qualification, adds up faster than people expect. Not because any single day feels like progress, but because a few months of that kind of narrow-aimed effort is enough to actually change what you're qualified for, which changes what you're paid. The 20 minutes matters less than the aim, honestly. I've seen people study for hours a week with no clear target and end up with a vague sense of having learned something. And I've seen people study for 20 focused minutes toward one specific credential and end up with an actual raise. The hours weren't the difference. The aim was. If you're on a low salary right now, ask yourself honestly what the very next role above yours actually requires that you don't currently have. Not someday, not eventually. Specifically, right now, what's the actual gap? That gap is usually smaller and more learnable than it feels. And closing it tends to move your income faster than almost anything you could do with the money you're currently earning. Strategy 3. Let raises pass through you instead of catching up to you. This is the one that quietly sabotages more people than almost anything else on this list. A raise arrives, and within a month or two, spending has expanded to meet it. A nicer apartment, a few more takeout nights, a subscription that felt affordable now. And 6 months later, the raise has been fully absorbed, and the actual financial position hasn't moved at all. On a low salary specifically, this trap is even easier to fall into, because every raise genuinely does feel deserved and overdue, which makes it feel wrong not to let your life visibly improve alongside it. The strategy isn't to never let your life improve. It's to make sure some fixed part of every raise skips your spending entirely and goes straight to the side that's actually building something. This pattern is so common it has a name in personal finance circles, lifestyle inflation. But knowing the name rarely stops it from happening because it never feels like inflation while it's occurring. It feels like finally being able to afford things you'd been putting off, which is a much more sympathetic story to tell yourself in the moment than I'm quietly canceling out my own raise. A simple version of this: whenever your pay actually increases, split the increase itself, not your whole paycheck. Half goes toward whatever quality of life improvement you've been waiting for. Half goes straight into savings before it ever has the chance to quietly disappear into slightly nicer versions of things you already had. You still get to feel the raise. It just doesn't get to fully own you. This works precisely because it doesn't ask you to live like nothing changed, which almost nobody can actually sustain for long. It only asks you to make sure the improvement and the progress happen at the same time, instead of the improvement quietly eating the whole thing by itself. Do this before the raise even hits your account, if you can. Deciding the split in advance, while it's still abstract, is much easier than deciding it after the extra money has already landed and started whispering suggestions about what it could be spent on instead. Track this one specifically, because it's easy to convince yourself in the moment that you did it when you actually didn't. Look back at your last raise, if you've had one recently. If your spending is now higher by roughly the same amount your pay went up, that's the sign this strategy needs to actually start, not just be agreed with in theory. Strategy 4. Trade time while you don't have capital. Investing usually assumes you have spare money to put to work. On a low salary, that spare money often genuinely doesn't exist yet, which is where most generic financial advice quietly stops being useful to you. What you may have instead, at least for a season, is time. Evenings, weekends, hours that aren't currently being converted into anything. This isn't a suggestion to work yourself into exhaustion indefinitely. It's a suggestion that time is a genuinely investable asset when capital isn't available, the same way money is investable when time isn't. And trading some of it deliberately for a defined season toward building either extra income or a marketable skill is one of the only forms of investing available to someone starting from very little. It's worth being honest that this trade is not free. Rest matters, relationships matter, and burning every spare hour indefinitely tends to backfire eventually. The strategy works because it's bounded, not because it's unlimited. A defined stretch of extra effort, aimed at something specific, is a completely different proposition than permanently sacrificing your evenings for the rest of your working life. The specific side hustle matters less than people assume. Selling unused items, a few hours of freelance work in an existing skill, weekend gig work, tutoring, anything that converts otherwise idle hours into either direct income or a portfolio that eventually earns more. What matters is treating that extra income differently from your regular paycheck. It never touches the regular budget. It goes straight toward the goal that made you start trading the hours in the first place. The moment side income gets absorbed into everyday spending the same way a raise does, all the actual leverage disappears, and you're just working more hours for the same financial position you already had. The whole point is that this income moves somewhere your regular paycheck doesn't. A separate account helps enforce this more than any amount of good intentions does. If the side income lands in the same account as everything else, it quietly blends in with grocery money and rent money within a week, and the entire strategy collapses without anyone ever consciously deciding to abandon it. I want to be honest that this one has a real cost. Time you'd otherwise spend resting or with people you care about. That cost is genuinely worth naming instead of glossing over. The strategy isn't to trade all of your time indefinitely. It's to trade some of it deliberately for a season with an actual endpoint, towards something specific enough that you'll know when the season's over. Strategy 5. Automate before you feel ready. Because on a low salary, you will genuinely never feel ready. There's always going to be a more comfortable month to start in, a slightly bigger cushion that would make it feel safer, a version of your situation just a little further down the road that seems like the obvious time to begin. That month tends not to actually arrive on its own. Waiting for readiness assumes willpower is a reliable resource you can call on repeatedly, month after month, indefinitely. It isn't for almost anyone, especially not when money is already tight and every decision already feels like it's competing against something else that also needs the money. There's also a strange kind of relief in giving up on the idea that you need to feel ready first. Almost nobody actually feels ready. The people who end up automating their finances aren't the ones who waited until it felt comfortable. They're the ones who set it up anyway, uncomfortably, and let the discomfort fade the way it almost always does after the first month or two. Automating removes the decision entirely, which matters more on a tight budget than on a comfortable one, because a tight budget means more decisions, more often, about money that's already stretched thin. Every decision you remove from that pile is one less place your resolve can quietly fail on a hard week. The transfer just happens. You don't have to feel motivated about it or even remember it exists. This is the same underlying idea as strategy 1, just applied more broadly. Bills, savings, even a small buffer fund, all set to move automatically the day income arrives, so that by the time you actually look at what's left, the important decisions have already been made without needing your daily willpower at all. This is also where these 6 strategies start reinforcing each other instead of operating separately. The 1% from strategy 1, the split raise from strategy 3, even a modest side income from strategy 4, all of it can run through this same automated structure, so the whole system runs largely on its own once it's been set up a single time. If you're waiting to feel financially comfortable before you set anything up automatically, I'd gently suggest that feeling might not arrive first. For a lot of people, the automation is actually what creates the comfortable feeling later, not the other way around. It's hard to feel out of control of your money once most of the important decisions are already made before you even see the number. Strategy 6. Avoid the traps that are specifically built for people on tight budgets. Buy now, pay later checkouts. Payday loans. High-interest small credit lines marketed as convenient. These products don't exist by accident, and they aren't marketed evenly across every income level. They're disproportionately aimed at exactly the situation of not quite having enough this month, because that situation is extremely profitable for whoever's on the other end of the loan. On a low salary, the margin for error is already small. These specific products are designed to quietly widen the gap they claim to be closing, charging fees and interest that turn a temporary shortfall into a much longer and more expensive one, precisely at the moment someone has the least room to absorb it. The language around these products is worth noticing too. Convenient, flexible, no hidden fees. Phrases designed to make a genuinely expensive form of borrowing sound like a helpful feature rather than what it actually is. Reading the real terms, the actual interest rate, the actual fee structure, is often uncomfortable enough on its own to make the decision for you. This one is less about willpower and more about recognizing the pattern before you're standing inside it. If a purchase requires financing to afford right now, on a low salary, that's rarely a sign the purchase is a good idea with slightly awkward timing. It's usually a sign the purchase doesn't currently fit, and the financing is just making that fact quieter and easier to ignore for a few weeks. The small buffer fund from Strategy 5 is what actually makes this strategy possible in practice. Even a modest cushion means fewer genuine emergencies that seem to require one of these products in the first place, which is exactly why these 6 strategies are built to reinforce each other rather than stand alone. There's a specific moment worth watching for at checkout. The instant relief of seeing a big total broken into 4 smaller payments instead. That relief is doing a lot of persuading, very quickly, and it's worth pausing on purpose before letting it make the decision for you. Protecting the small margin you already have is just as important as growing it, especially early on, when there isn't much margin to spare in the first place. A single high-interest trap can quietly undo months of the other 5 strategies combined, which is exactly why it earns a spot on this list, even though it's framed as avoiding something rather than doing something. So that's 6. Save the percentage, not the amount. Invest in the one skill that moves your own number. Let raises pass through you instead of catching up to you. Trade time while you don't have capital. Automate before you feel ready. And avoid the traps specifically built for people in exactly your situation. None of these required a higher salary to start. That's deliberate and worth sitting with for a second. Every one of these 6 is available to you today at whatever your current number actually is, which means the thing standing between you and starting was never really the salary. It was whether someone had actually laid out what to do with it. Go back through the list one more time, honestly. Some of these you're probably already doing, at least partly. Others might be sitting there completely untouched, not because they're hard exactly, but because nobody ever framed them as something available to you specifically, on the income you actually have right now rather than the income you're hoping to have eventually. I'd also gently push back on the idea that a low salary means you have to wait. It's tempting to treat these 6 strategies as something to circle back to once things improve. Once the raise comes through, once the debt's paid down, once the job situation stabilizes. Almost every version of once things improve I've seen actually work started these exact 6 things before the improvement, not after it. Waiting for the right moment is usually just a more comfortable way of saying not yet. And not yet has a way of quietly becoming the permanent answer if nothing ever forces the question. Starting small, today, on an imperfect number, beats a perfect plan that never actually gets switched on. None of these 6 will make you rich by next month, and I'd be lying if I told you otherwise. What they actually do is make sure the version of you a few years from now on whatever salary you're earning by then is starting from a genuinely different position than the version of you sitting here today. Not because the number changed first, but because what you did with it changed first. If you're on a low salary right now, pick one of these 6, just one, and actually set it up this week, not someday. The percentage doesn't need to be big. The skill doesn't need to be impressive yet. It just needs to actually start on the number you have right now instead of waiting for a number that feels more ready to receive it. None of this required a different starting point than the one you're actually standing at. That's genuinely the whole message. The number on your paycheck is real, and it matters, and it's also not the only thing that's going to decide where you end up. What you do with it starting today is going to end up mattering just as much.